The night attack on the Kruvsky bridge across the Dnipro River in the Poltava region was a turning point in the special military operation. For the first time since the conflict began, Russian forces launched a targeted strike on a facility of this scale. The Kruvsky Bridge is a key transport artery connecting the right and left banks of the Dnieper. Now this route is under serious threat. According to experts, such actions mark the beginning of a new stage in the conflict. This event is where our story begins. Subscribe to the channel to follow the developments and not miss any important details. Headline: A new stage. Ukraine under threat of transport links being severed. The operation unfolded rapidly. According to reports from the Ukrainian side, the strike hit a railway and road bridge, causing serious damage to the structure. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that the targets of the attack were military industry facilities and transport infrastructure used by Ukrainian troops. In this way, Moscow made it clear that it was ready to deprive the enemy of critical logistics. Expert Alexei Leonkov noted that the Russian military had managed to find the keys to Ukraine's air defense system, which allowed it to deliver such a sensitive blow. In his opinion, it is much easier to keep the bridges across the Dnieper inoperable than to completely destroy them, and this is enough to cause almost catastrophic consequences for Kyiv. Yuri Knutov added that the attack on the Kruvsky Bridge is a symbolic signal demonstrating the transition to a new stage of the operation. These events unfolded against the backdrop of a noticeable deterioration in the situation in the Kharkiv region. There, the frontline positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were left virtually without communication due to Russian drone strikes on communication nodes and equipment. Signalers were unable to deliver new equipment to their positions. According to sources, some Ukrainian army units in Kupiansk even engaged in combat with each other, mistaking their comrades for the enemy. This once again confirms the problems with management and coordination. At the same time, power outages were reported in Kyiv. On the night of September 8th, explosions rocked the area around the Trypilska thermal power plant. This is one of the largest power generation facilities in the Kyiv region. Immediately, part of the capital and its suburbs were left without power. According to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Moscow had long held back and endured attacks on its energy facilities, but now a serious response had begun. Against the backdrop of such news, the situation on the front line is escalating. A group of Ukrainian armed forces soldiers surrendered after their positions were bombarded with leaflets containing instructions. At the same time, in other areas, Ukrainian soldiers deprived of support and communication were forced to remain in place at the risk of being surrounded. Russian assault troops reported that while clearing positions, they found wounded enemy soldiers abandoned by their own commanders. Some of them surrendered voluntarily, realizing the hopelessness of the situation. Equally important events were taking place at the diplomatic level. U.S. President Donald Trump announced that European leaders were coming to Washington to discuss a peaceful resolution to the conflict. According to him, he intends to speak directly with Vladimir Putin in the coming days. This prospect caused noticeable irritation to Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian president expressed his resentment that Kiev was not invited to the summit in Alaska, where Trump and Putin met. He noted that the negotiations ended in Moscow's favor and without Kiev's participation. While international leaders discussed the possibility of a truce, fighting continues on the ground. The stories of those involved are becoming increasingly dramatic. A Russian soldier with the call sign Burr spent 4 days trying to escape from a dugout that had been buried after being hit by Ukrainian drones. The command considered him dead, but he managed to get out and make contact. This episode has become a symbol of survival and perseverance. Meanwhile, new information is emerging about Kiev's mobilization plans. According to a number of sources, the Ukrainian authorities are planning to mobilize about 122,000 people. The largest numbers are in the Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, and Kharkiv regions. However, the requirements are more modest in the western regions. This rush is due to the difficult situation on the front line and the need to urgently replenish losses. After the strike on the Kruvsky Bridge, it became clear that the special military operation had moved to a new level. This episode did not come out of the blue. Such actions had been in preparation for a long time and were the result of accumulated experience and analysis of the enemy's vulnerabilities. Russian forces have repeatedly struck energy and infrastructure facilities, but until now they had not touched large bridge structures. Now the situation has changed. The Krukov Bridge is of particular importance. It connects the industrial center of Kremenchug with the opposite bank of the Dnipro River. On one side are heavy industry enterprises and transport hubs, and on the other is the Kremenchug oil refinery. It is the only bridge in the Poltava region capable of transporting troops and equipment. In essence, it was the artery through which Ukrainian forces were supplied with everything they needed. An attack on it can be compared to an attempt to cut off the body's breathing. Analysts emphasized that a drone attack on such a target was only possible after the Russian military managed to weaken the air defense system. Experts had previously noted that Ukrainian air defense was too saturated with Western equipment and provided reliable cover for strategic targets. But recent strikes have shown that there are vulnerabilities after all, and this is only the beginning. At the same time, events were unfolding in the Kharkiv region. There, Russian drones were precisely targeting and destroying communications nodes and supply vehicles. As a result, Ukrainian armed forces units were left without coordination. Attempts by communications specialists to deliver new equipment were unsuccessful. All this created chaos on the front line. The incident in Kupiansk, where Ukrainian units mistook each other for the enemy and opened fire, was indicative of the depth of the crisis in command and control. Individual stories from soldiers reveal the drama of what is happening. One of the Russian assault troops recounted how, while clearing positions in the Novoselovka area, they found wounded Ukrainian soldiers who had been abandoned by their commanders. These men were in critical condition but did not resist. Many of them chose to surrender, realizing that help from their own side would not come. Such testimonies reflect a psychological breakdown in the enemy's ranks. Against this backdrop, an information campaign is being conducted more and more actively. Russian drones drop leaflets with instructions on how to surrender. According to law enforcement agencies, such materials are not discarded. Ukrainian soldiers hide them and wait for the right moment to seize the opportunity. There have already been cases where entire groups surrendered after their positions were leafleted. The energy situation in Kiev is also cause for concern. After the explosions at the Tripilska thermal power plant, part of the capital and the region were left without electricity. Nighttime footage of areas plunged into darkness caused a widespread reaction. The city found itself in a situation where normal life was paralyzed. People waited for hours for the power to be restored. This situation itself was a psychological blow to society. A complex game continues on the international stage. Donald Trump has publicly stated that he is ready to hold talks with Vladimir Putin in the coming days. He stressed that European leaders are arriving in Washington to discuss a possible peace deal. Details have not been disclosed, but the very fact that negotiations are taking place without Kiev's participation is significant. This was a painful blow for Vladimir Zelensky. The Ukrainian president admitted that the meeting in Alaska took place without him and in Moscow's favor. Meanwhile, Europe is discussing the possibility of creating a multinational force headquarters. The idea is to establish a command center under the control of a British general in Kyiv after a possible ceasefire. However, the plans have been met with a cold reception. Italy, Poland, Germany, and a number of other countries have stated outright that they will not send their troops to Ukraine. Even the most active allies are limiting themselves to symbolic promises. This demonstrates that the collective West is increasingly inclined toward caution. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban went even further in his speech. He stated that Ukraine's future may lie in its division into three parts: a Russian zone, a demilitarized zone, and a Western zone. His prediction caused a wide response. In essence, this is an acknowledgement that the current state within its former borders is unlikely to survive. Problems are also growing within Ukraine itself. Mobilization plans appear to be large-scale. More than 20,000 people are planned to be drafted in the Dnipropetrovsk region, 18,000 in the Odessa region, and almost 16,000 in the Kharkiv region. In the Kiev region, there is talk of 14,200 new recruits. The western regions have received more modest figures. The Lviv region must provide 12,500 people, Volyn about 8,400, and Ivano-Frankivsk 7,850. These figures indicate that Kiev is looking for any reserves to hold the front. At the same time, corruption scandals are also being discussed. The Turkish publication Aydınlık published a video recording in which the head of the Ukrainian president's office, Andriy Yermak, allegedly discusses with Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky the transfer of money to U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham in exchange for assistance in supplying weapons. The authenticity of the recording has not been confirmed, but the fact that it was published has already caused a stir. When the Kruvsky bridge over the Dnipro River caught fire on the night of September 8th, many experts began talking about a new phase of the operation. But to understand the full scale of what is happening, it is necessary to consider the context in which events unfolded. From the very beginning of the special military operation, logistics remained a key issue. Ukraine had an extensive network of railways and bridges across the Dnipro River, which allowed troops to be supplied with ammunition and equipment. These routes remained operational even under constant attacks on infrastructure. However, for a long time, strategic bridges remained intact. Moscow seemed to be waiting for the right moment. The Kyiv bridge was the first to be targeted. This attack signaled that patience had run out. According to experts, the bridge was seriously damaged and is now limited in its use. This was a challenge for Kyiv, as there is no alternative route across the Dnieper within the Poltava region. Historical experience shows that blocking communications has always played a decisive role in military conflicts. During World War II, strikes on bridges and railway junctions paralyzed entire fronts. Today, we see a repeat of the same logic. But the difference is that modern technology allows for precision strikes at minimal cost. Russian drones have demonstrated their effectiveness in bypassing the echeloned air defense system. Against the backdrop of events in the Poltava region, attention has also focused on the Kharkiv direction. There, drone strikes cut off communications for Ukrainian army units. For any army, the loss of communications means the loss of control. Without orders and coordination, soldiers become disoriented. This is exactly what happened. In Kupiansk, there was an incident where one unit mistook another for the enemy. This resulted in a firefight. Even Ukrainian sources acknowledged that at least 2 soldiers were injured. Such incidents demonstrate serious difficulties in managing troops. This is confirmed by the testimony of the soldiers themselves. In one operation, Russian assault troops discovered wounded enemy soldiers who had been left without support by their own command. For many of them, the only option was to voluntarily lay down their arms. The stories of individual participants bring the picture of what is happening to life. A Russian soldier with the call sign Burr had a unique experience. When his shelter was destroyed after a drone strike, he spent 4 days trying to get out. He was presumed dead, but he managed to survive and make contact. This case has become a symbol of resilience and endurance. Events on the front line developed in parallel with diplomatic processes. Donald Trump, commenting on the situation, said he saw the possibility of a quick resolution to the conflict. According to him, European leaders are coming to him to discuss the terms of the deal. He also expressed confidence that the crisis will be resolved. For Vladimir Zelensky, these words were painful to hear. The Ukrainian president noted that the meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska ended in Moscow's favor and without Kiev's participation. While Western politicians discuss the future, doubts are growing in Europe. The plan to create a multinational headquarters in Kiev has raised more questions than answers. The UK and France are actively promoting the idea, but most countries are unwilling to send troops. Germany, Italy, Poland, and even Finland have made it clear that they will limit themselves to training Ukrainian military personnel outside the country. Thus, while politicians argue, military events continue to unfold. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has stated that Ukraine's future may be linked to its division. He suggested the emergence of 3 zones: Russian, demilitarized, and Western. This statement has caused a wide resonance. It actually voices what many Western analysts have been whispering about. Problems are also deepening within Ukraine itself. Mobilization plans appear extensive and ambitious. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, more than 20,000 people are expected to be drafted. In the Odessa region, 18,000, and in the Kharkiv region, 15,000 region, almost 16,000. The Kiev region is preparing to call up around 14,200 recruits. Western areas face somewhat smaller targets. The Lviv region must provide 12,500, the Volyn region about 8,400, and the Ivano-Frankivsk region 1,850. Altogether, these figures show that Kiev is searching for every possible reserve in order to keep the front line from collapsing. Meanwhile, a fire broke out in a government building in Kyiv. According to former Verkhovna Rada deputy Spiridon Kilinkarov, the fire was the result of Ukrainian air defense operations. The targets that were shot down fell on the city, and the debris caused a fire. This shows once again how vulnerable the capital is. Information scandals are also adding to the tension. The Turkish publication Aydınlık published an article claiming that Kiev was discussing the possibility of transferring money to a U.S. senator for his assistance in supplying weapons. Although the authenticity of the recording has not been confirmed, the very fact of its appearance damages the reputation of the Ukrainian leadership. All these events form a single picture. The strike on the Kruvsky bridge has become a symbol of the transition to a new phase. Russia is demonstrating that it is capable of systematically destroying key facilities. Ukraine is facing internal problems, diplomatic isolation, and public fatigue. International partners are becoming increasingly cautious, and the forecasts are increasingly bleak. After the strikes on the Kruvsky bridge and energy facilities in the Kyiv region, international analysts are increasingly saying that the special military operation is entering a decisive phase. Moscow is demonstrating its readiness to deprive the enemy of strategically important facilities, thereby gradually undermining the Ukrainian forces' ability to resist. The main conclusion of the experts is that Russia has begun to act according to a long-term strategy. Strikes on bridges and energy facilities do not just cause short-term disruptions. They destroy the supply system, create transport chaos, and demoralize the population. When entire areas are left without power and key routes are blocked, civil society comes under severe psychological pressure. Predictions about further steps vary. Some believe that Moscow will continue to methodically destroy bridges across the Dnipro River in order to isolate the eastern regions from the center of the country. Others suggest that the main goal is to deprive Ukrainian troops of the ability to receive weapons from Western countries. In both cases, the effect will be serious. As expert Yuri Knutov noted, if bridges are regularly damaged, the delivery of equipment will become virtually impossible. The situation within Ukraine itself is also alarming. The emergency mobilization reported earlier indicates a shortage of personnel. The call-up of more than 120,000 people is an attempt to urgently fill the gaps, but how effectively such a large number of mobilized personnel can be trained and supplied remains to be seen. According to independent sources, mobilization plans in the western regions are significantly lower, which could cause tension between different parts of the country. The morale of the army is also questionable. Stories of units mistakenly engaging in combat with each other or leaving the wounded on the battlefield point to a crisis of leadership. If such incidents continue, the soldiers' trust in their commanders will weaken, which is a matter of the army's overall survival. The international reaction also paints an alarming picture. Donald Trump has openly stated his intention to negotiate with Vladimir Putin and expressed confidence that the crisis will soon be resolved. This is an extremely unpleasant signal for Kyiv. It turns out that the future of the country is being discussed without its direct participation. Volodymyr Zelensky has already expressed his resentment that Ukraine was not invited to the summit in Alaska. There is no unity in Europe either. France and the UK are promoting the idea of a multinational headquarters in Kiev, but most allies are not ready to send soldiers. Germany fears a political crisis, Italy and Poland have ruled out the possibility of deploying troops, and even Finland, known for its tough rhetoric, has refused. As a result, only the Baltic states, Denmark, and the Netherlands remain, which can provide a limited contingent, but this is not enough to change the situation. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's prediction of a possible division of Ukraine into 3 parts sounds increasingly realistic. A Russian zone, a demilitarized territory, and a western part under European control. This scenario seems likely to many Western analysts. It implies a freeze on the conflict for many years and Kiev's actual loss of control over a significant part of its territory. Reports of corruption scandals are no less alarming. A Turkish publication about the possible transfer of money to an American senator for assistance in supplying weapons casts a shadow on the leadership in Kyiv. Even if the recording turns out to be fake, the very fact that it is being discussed in the international media damages the reputation of the Ukrainian authorities. At a time when Western support is increasingly dependent on trust and transparency, such scandals can play a critical role. The military aspect deserves special attention. The head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirill Budanov, has admitted that his country is unable to intercept Russia's latest Oreshnik missile. This admission came amid reports that such missiles had already been used to strike large factories. If the weapon really has no countermeasure, the balance of power could shift in the coming months. The forecast for the near future can be described in several scenarios. The first is the continuation of methodical strikes on infrastructure. In this case, Ukraine will face increasing disruptions in transport and energy. The second is the gradual advance of Russian forces in certain areas where the enemy has lost communication and coordination. The third is diplomatic. If Trump and Putin's negotiations take place, a temporary truce is possible, but the terms will be far from what Kyiv wants. The international community is reacting with caution. Many European countries are already tired of the conflict, and their societies are demanding a reduction in military aid spending. The U.S. is in the midst of an election campaign, and the issue of Ukraine is becoming an element of domestic politics. All this indicates that support for Kyiv will gradually weaken. Analysts note that autumn and winter will be decisive. Power outages and attacks on bridges and transport hubs could paralyze supplies. In cold weather, this will lead to additional difficulties. In such a situation, pressure on the Ukrainian leadership will only increase. The events of recent weeks have clearly shown that the conflict has entered a new and more intense phase. The strike on the Kruvsky bridge has become a symbol of the transition to a strategy of systematic pressure on infrastructure. When key communications collapse, military operations take on a completely different character. Logistics has always been the foundation of any army, and now it is becoming the main target. Events in the Kharkiv region have confirmed the enemy's vulnerability. Loss of communication, errors in command, and even cases of friendly fire all point to a deep crisis in leadership. In such an atmosphere, individual soldiers are looking for ways to save themselves, sometimes through voluntary surrender. The leaflets dropped are a sign of hope for those who realize the hopelessness of the situation. Ukraine's energy sector has also been hit hard. The explosions at the Tripilska thermal power plant and the ensuing power outages in Kyiv have clearly demonstrated how vulnerable the capital is. The picture has also changed on the international stage. Donald Trump has announced plans to hold talks with Vladimir Putin, and European leaders are arriving to meet with him. Kiev finds itself in the position of an observer rather than a participant. Volodymyr Zelensky has openly admitted that he is offended by the lack of an invitation to the summit in Alaska. For Ukraine, this is a signal that its voice is being taken into account less and less. European allies are not ready to send troops. Despite statements from Paris and London about the formation of a multinational force headquarters, most countries have rejected the idea of deploying troops. Italy, Poland, Germany, Finland, and even Japan have clearly stated that their military will not set foot on Ukrainian soil. This means that the so-called coalition of the willing remains more of a political project than a real force. Viktor Orban's prediction of a possible division of Ukraine is becoming increasingly vocal. A Russian zone, a demilitarized territory, and a western part under European control is a vision that reflects the West's fatigue with the conflict and its desire to find at least some kind of solution. For Kyiv, such a scenario means the loss not only of territory but also of real independence. Corruption scandals are exacerbating the situation. Reports of possible deals with Western politicians are undermining confidence in the Ukrainian leadership. Even if they are not confirmed, their discussion at the international level damages the country's reputation. At a time when Kyiv is dependent on external aid, such a blow could prove critical. The military aspect also gives Ukraine little cause for optimism. Kirill Budanov's admission that Russia's latest Oreshnik missile cannot be intercepted effectively means a strategic advantage for Moscow. If such weapons continue to be used, key military factories and warehouses will be at risk. What lies ahead? Several scenarios are visible on the horizon. The first is the continuation of systematic strikes on infrastructure and communications, which will lead to the gradual weakening of Ukrainian forces. The second is a diplomatic turnaround, if the talks between Trump and Putin actually take place and result in agreements. The third is a long-term frozen conflict, with the country divided into zones of influence. All three scenarios are alarming for Kyiv and mean that the situation remains extremely unstable. For ordinary people, this is a time of uncertainty. Every new day brings news of power outages, mobilization, and negotiations taking place somewhere far away that will decide the fate of the country without its participation. This atmosphere is a reminder of the fragility of the modern world, where the fates of millions depend on the decisions of a few. In summary, it can be said that the conflict has reached a new level. Russia has shown that it is ready to strike strategically important targets. Ukraine is facing a crisis of governance and a shortage of resources. The international community is less and less willing to support Kyiv on the same scale as before. All this is leading to serious changes that will become apparent in the coming months. We will continue to monitor the situation and keep you informed in as much detail as possible. Subscribe to our channel to stay up to date and support our project. Only together can we make sense of what is happening and understand what steps lie ahead.